Good evening and welcome to tonight's Lewisboro Ledger Town Board debate. I'm J.D. Pirro, along with Editor-in-Chief Matt Spillane and my colleague Jane Dove, and we'd like to welcome you to this first of Town Board debates, first with the Town Board candidates. They need no introduction, but we're going to introduce them anyway. From left to right on your screen, candidate of the Democrat and Working Families and Independence parties, Mr. Richard Sclarin and Ms. Lisa Wickersham. And to your right, candidates of the Republican and Conservative parties, Mr. Frank Kelly and Peter DeLucia. We are going to begin the questioning with Jane Dove.
We have divided our questions into groups of topics, and the first topic is working together. And I am going to give the first question to Mr. DeLucia.
Oh, thank you, Jane.
Well, you're welcome. You have worked very closely and effectively with Mr. Parsons, excuse me, as his deputy supervisor for the past 2 years. A very congenial relationship. I've seen how helpful, how supportive. There seems to be an element of liking each other in the mix. And I would just like to know why you think he should be replaced with Mr. Fischetti.
Well, I think that's a great question. First of all, absolutely true. I do like Mr. Parsons. We get along very well. We've known each other for years, and we have had a very cordial and, productive working relationship. And I'm proud to say I feel that the entire board has had a productive and working relationship. As far as our opinions, I would think we're probably about 90 to 95%. We agree on the same things. Where our big difference is on taxes and where we should go in the future with our roads and as far as how we should finance them. So, that is why at this point in time I would support Tom Fischetti as supervisor, because he is of the same opinion that we cannot put ourselves in any further debt as far as raising taxes to our tax base. Right now, we want to look at building our tax base. Our real estate values have collapsed over the years, and what we'd like to do is raise those real estate values. The best way to do that is to support our taxpayers, have them spend their money in town, spend their money on their houses to improve that and attract other people into the neighborhood and improve our businesses, not have outlandish tax increases.
So Mr. Fischetti has told you that he is on board with bonding for the road work that needs to be done.
Once again, I think we're jumping before we're jumping towards immediately saying on bonding and how much to bond. One of the things was we still needed a plan, and I'm sure you'll have some questions about the roads, and we can get into it at that point in time. But first and foremost, the town board needed a plan. That was another problem that we had originally when Mr. Parsons supported or proposed an 18% tax increase. Supported an 18% tax increase. We did not support that 18% tax increase just to raise on the theory of this is the number we need to do our roads. We asked for a study to be done so we can look at what really needs to be done, what roads need to have work done. When we had a professional consultant in, that professional consultant said that that was absurd just to take money and throw it at your worst roads. You need to actually have a plan.
Actually, on the topic of working together, I'd like to ask Mr. Sclarin. In 2005, Mr. Sclarin, and you were chairman of the Republican committee, the Republican Party supported Edward Mahoney against the incumbent Democrat Jim Nordgren. Here's how the New York Times described Mr. Mahoney. Edward Mahoney is a Republican who has cast himself as the property rights candidate, promising to balance open space concerns with the need for an increased tax base. Did Lewisboro voters make a mistake when they defeated Jim Nordgren and elected Ed Mahoney?
I think that the promise in 2005 didn't turn out to be the reality as things progressed during the first term. I think that there was a lot of difficulty in taking over the realm as town supervisor, which resulted in a lot of difficulties during the first term. Those difficulties included problems in managing the pool project, which among them were having a situation where a contractor was hired who had multiple suits against them. There was no performance bond which was secured for that. So I think that the difficulty was the fact that Mr. Mahoney had many difficulties in actually handling the day-to-day responsibilities of the job during his first term.
So if you were wrong with respect to Mr. Mahoney as town supervisor, why should we think you're correct now with respect to re-electing Mr. Parsons?
Because Mr. Mahoney, at the time he was elected, had no experience in the position. Peter Parsons, aside from his more than 40 years in the community, has had 2 years of experience in the position. So he has demonstrated his ability to keep the town working in a collegial environment, move forward on his priorities, and also dealing with that in a situation where he is a minority on the board. And part of the reason that we are running is that we believe that Peter Parsons should have a majority on this board so that we could move forward with the town issues of most importance.
Mr. Kelly, do you think the town board's moved forward while you've been on the town board?
I want to answer the issue of collegiality first, because I think it's important. And I think our current board has moved away from the nasty, nitpicky politics of the past. When I first moved here, I mean, you couldn't throw enough bombs in the paper at each other. And I don't think that's appropriate for a mature community such as ours. I think that's, it doesn't help anybody, and it bodes ill for any progress with respect to doing anything on the board. I think, certainly since I've been on the board, there's been a collegial tone, and I think collegiality and compromise is to be preferred where possible. There's going to be confrontation occasionally when you have true differences in the details, and that's the nature of the beast. That's how this game gets played, you know. You should posit your position to the fullest extent possible, but at no time should anybody be nasty. And I've expressed this to a number of people during the campaign, and my last campaign. I don't believe in personal attacks. I don't think it's warranted. Talk to the issues, stay the issues. You're going to be friends and neighbors in the community, whether you win, whether you lose, whether you live here, whether you're on the board, and whether you finish your service. So I think maintaining a tone of openness, friendliness, compromise, and collegiality is appropriate, and I think that best moves things down the road in terms of getting things done.
Ms. Wickersham, you have the distinction of being one of the only people up there who has no experience in town government. How do you view the question of working together and seeing Republicans and Democrats the last few years?
Well, I think I've stated in several of my interviews with the Ledger that I'm not really driven by party lines. I had been a Republican, I'm an independent now, and I actually have voted Democratic in many elections. So I look at the issues singularly for what they are, what the underpinnings are, why we have an issue, what are the solutions, and I'm very open to exploring any and all possibilities to find the right answers for the town. I think in terms of getting along with the board, I think I would do extremely well. My experience in business and in the community as a volunteer is one where I have led groups, participated in groups, and I believe that my participation is marked by thorough listening and also contribution, not just to move the air around, but if I have something to say, I will certainly feel comfortable either disagreeing with a point or raising something new to think about. I think that in terms of collegiality, it all comes down to how you present your opposing views. And I think it's important that we stick to the issues, as Frank said, and talk about in ways of saying that's a good point, but have you thought of this? And I think just those very small ways of communicating with one another go a long way to making people less frustrated and filled with angst at the end of an evening.
Jane, you had a follow-up.
Yeah, Ms. Wickersham, your slogan, "Together for a Better Lewisboro." What do you hope or want or think you can see in the Lewisboro of the next 4 years that is an improvement over the Lewisboro of the past 4 years, aside from getting decent roads we can drive on?
Yeah, I think the roads thing we're all talking about. Together for a Better Lewisboro is not just the town board working well together, that's a given, and it's really about being more inclusive with the community, the residents at large. It's also working well with the town's employees, with the leaders of the town. It's working well with any consultants we may work with and the like. So together just means leveraging the talents and input of all stakeholders involved in a discussion and making sure that all thoughts are heard and fleshed out. That's what Together for Better Lewisboro means. It's actually not my slogan solely, it's our campaign slogan.
I know, it's
Yes,
yours.
thank you.
Mr. DeLucia, your response. Have you been working together for a better Lewisboro?
I feel we definitely have been working together for a I feel we've definitely been working together for a better Lewisboro. Got to get the slogan out there. It's not that easy. Over the years, we've had to, look towards other avenues for revenues, for shared services. We worked very hard just recently with the town of Pound Ridge. We had a vacuum truck that had a very deteriorating body but a good engine, but they were able to give us a body. So we were able to get together and work at a very low cost to put together a vac truck so we could actually clean our storm basins to make sure we comply with our MS4 regulations. We've worked with the school on being able to use space. They wanted a facility use committee to be able to actually have to have taxpayers spend double to be able to use their space. Well, you know, we were able to sit down, we were able to compromise, we banged out an intermunicipal agreement with them so that we could use the school for our camp program, that we could extend our camp program an extra week in the summer to save the taxpayers money as opposed to have to pull them out of camp and put them into daycare before school starts again and vacations end. So we've done a lot of work to work with the community, especially during the hurricanes that just happened. My God, we've had 2 hurricanes and 2 October snowstorms in the last couple of years. And if that doesn't show how the town board, the community, the fire departments, the volunteers all pull together to get through that, I don't know what would, JD.
Mr. Sclaren, your response with respect to the town board's responses during Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Sandy, did they do a good job?
I think that they did the best that they could be under the circumstances. I know that the storm was an unforeseen situation here, but we have on a going forward basis, we need more resources. I know that I was we were out for a week, and there were people in town who were out for even more. We have a situation where we have not addressed issues such as cutting back trees as much as they need to. It's an unforeseen. It's a problem. We've had the 100-year storms. We've probably had about 3 of them in the last 15 years. Everybody did work together under the circumstances, but part of the problem was that resources were not available to do things like restore electricity. There has to be better coordination. I know that one of the issues that I discovered myself when I was with my family over in Rockland for one day to get a hot shower after 6 days into the storm is that I was actually speaking with a crew that had come up with Alabama at the same hotel. They couldn't do their work because they couldn't have priority to get gasoline down the street. They were calling up in Newburgh to try and get a gas station open.
Is that a fault of the town board, though?
It's not a fault of the town board, but you have to foresee, one of the things you have to try and be able to foresee in a situation such as that is having boots on the ground, as it were, and having the resources dedicated to here in Lewisboro. It seems as though during the storm is that Lewisboro was way down on the priority list as far as restoring power. There were many other places, down county and other areas, who had power restored faster than we did.
Mr. Sclaren, I know that Mr. DeLucia has worked very hard and very effectively at getting some of the things you're saying should be done. So would you like to tell him what you've done?
Well, one of the things was, thank you, Jane, one of the things we had to work with was NYSEG. I mean, NYSEG is our power provider. When you talk about down county, you're talking about Con Ed in a different entity. And we had asked after Irene and that October snowstorm that we have a liaison in town to work with our highway department, because our highway department does a fantastic job. We have boots on the ground and we have resources. We have chainsaws, we have people, we have trucks. But we can't go and have our people cut any trees back that have power lines on them unless they are certified by NYSEG that those lines are dead. So we need NYSEG boots on the ground, as simple as a truck, what they call a make-safe crew, a line crew, there to be able to guarantee that those lines work a few steps in front of our people and go through. Then as the other resources come through, we had people coming as far as Canada, coming down into our town to do work. As they come through, they can follow up and start putting the signs back up and doing power restoration. What happened after that, they provided us a liaison after Irene, but for Sandy, that liaison was at the county EOC. We still didn't have what we needed in town that they had guaranteed us. What we have done is, myself along with other politicians and managers of town government have gone to NYSEG for multiple meetings now to guarantee that we will have that truck in our town. We had to rattle a lot of cages and spend a lot of time on the phone and going to meetings, but right now what we were able to achieve is if and when, it's not if, it's when we have another storm, NYSEG will provide those resources to us in the town to work with our current resources.
We want to move to another topic, but Ms. Wickersham, I'm going to give you 30 seconds on this issue of working together with respect to things like storm management.
Okay, my view of the last storm, Sandy, was that as a resident and not a prospective board member at the time, I felt very comforted by the town's response. I thought that the board and Mr. Parsons were visible and accessible, and I received good communications. So I didn't see any, I don't think that could be helped, the fact that I was out of, in the dark for 8 days. I don't blame the board for that.
You said Mr. Parsons, right?
Yes,
Okay.
Supervisor Parsons.
Mr. Kelly, 30 seconds.
Sure. Emergency and disaster management is an iterative process. That means you begin and you walk, you crawl, walk, and run as you go along. We started with the emergency task force probably in 2002. When we first started drafting the emergency management plan, I was privileged to be on that committee. And we're lucky that we had that plan in place, and it worked. In our town, we did not suffer any loss of life, nor did we suffer any severe casualty, nor did we suffer any long-term major infrastructure outage. There was electricity out, but there's not a lot you can do about that. The one thing that disaster management will show you is that you can't make something unhappen. You can just make the management of what happens the most palatable for everybody involved. I think the major issue that we've dealt with is pre-positioning of the NICEAG assets to shut off the nodes. And we have maps and we have things now that show us where the hot zones are, so we can get the people who do the work where the fire departments were great, I mean, really great. And the volunteer ambulance was fantastic, and the other volunteers we had were great. But we need to be able to get them safely out to clear the roads, open the major supply routes, and be able to get people to implement the plan that we have. And we could use volunteers. I'm going to use that for a bully pulpit now. We could use volunteers, because at our last meeting, we're looking for citizen volunteers, not to do any heroic stuff, not to do any first responder stuff. Just become familiar.
We'd like to move on now to another issue, the issue of taxes, and we're going to go, just the luck of the draw, we're going to go back to Mr. DeLucia. Mr. DeLucia, for the last few elections, Republican town board candidates have run on a platform of keeping town taxes low. But since you have been on the town board, town taxes have increased more than 40%. If you're re-elected, what will you do in the next 4 years to keep town taxes from increasing?
Well, it's out of my control as far as a town board member when you say that taxes have increased 40% under my term. I mean, they did increase during that term. There's no denying that, but it wasn't under the supervision of the board at that point in time as far as having the majority vote on the board. Those budgets that increased taxes to that level were argued vehemently against by me, by Al Perusa, by Frank Kelly, and even Bruce Pavlov at the time. We felt that that was not the thing to do. What we've done under our leadership during Charlie Duffy, during Ed Mahoney, and we've worked very hard to do is basically not only control spending, right-size the town, move forward to actually to something that is achievable as far as making sure we have the employee benefits under control, and we've asked for that numerous times.
Mr. Sclaren, your response.
I think that the problem is that Mr. DeLucia talked about taxes being increased, not within his control. What has been within his control is advocating increased bonding. And when he first came into office, there was a $3.1 million just about surplus. And actually, during Tom Herzog's administration, the surplus was even criticized as being too high. And the reserve was criticized for being too high. During the first 3 years, there was $6.75 million in bonding, just about. So that's a $10 million swing in the town's finances. Part of the problem is that when the Republican view of keeping taxes low, the fact of the matter is when you're bonding money and you have a credit card bill which keeps increasing, that is serving to freeze out the ability to spend money. So now we're in a situation where we're over $1 million in annual payments on our $13.9 million debt, and that money is not available, and when you take that and you add to things like benefits, that's about 30% of our budget.
Mr. DeLucia, your response.
I think it's very important to make a clarification here. I can understand that maybe Richard isn't familiar with this. Out of the $13 million that is bonded, approximately $6 million of that is for the Oak Ridge Water and Sewer District. That is a separate bond that is for those people so they had clean water and they could flush the toilets. I think that's quite important. Also, there's money bonded in Mr. Sclaren's sewer district, in the Wild Oaks district. So when you look at that $1 million in debt service that has to be paid every year, it really is about under $700,000 that's for town bonding, that includes a bond for open space, it includes a bond for 14 miles of road that was paved, and it includes a bond for a swimming pool that's actually revenue generating, and a project that was saved that, once, as Mr. Sclaren had mentioned, it had been inherited by the Mahoney administration with a non-bonded contractor that had multiple lawsuits against them. On top of that, I think it's very important to note that the S&P has rated our town numerous times since I've been elected. The first time in 2009 when there was a downgrade. But what was mentioned at that point in time was one of the assets of the town was that we have a favorable debt position. We were rated again in 2011. They mentioned again, one of the assets of the town, we have a favorable debt position. We only have a 1.3% per capita debt position. When we look at that, it is extremely low, not only for Westchester County municipalities, but for the entire state. And this is what is in our financial reports. You could read them online. I wasn't able to bring them here today, but you can go to www.yourlewisboro.com, where I'm making sure that all of these things are posted so you can take a look at. But it's very important to note that favorable debt position.
Ms. Wickersham, your response, is the town borrowing too much or taxing too much?
I think the town is borrowing too much still. I think that at this point, the bonding really does need to stop, and we need to do, really cauterize the wound. The problem is that even though we've had some relief on the interest and those kinds of things, we're foisting this debt on the current residents and future residents of the town because we can't make headway on building our cash reserves either. So each year, from what I understand of the budget, and I realize that I haven't lived with it at all, we're still trying to pay money into our cash reserves and build that back. We're trying to pay off the debt, and we're trying to manage the town. And we're still trying to honor requests for budget increases. So I think that something's got to give. So we need to, again, maybe kind of halt, look at the budgets with a careful, fresh set of eyes, maybe go for the low-hanging fruit, see what we can do to make some easy savings. We need to help build our tax base by helping small businesses prosper here and want to come here. I think working with the chamber, with Katie Daughtry, I think she's done a great job as president, being very visible and active and action-oriented. I think that we can forge better relationships as a town, being proponents of new businesses so that they feel as though they're not alone.
Well, with respect to new
Yes,
businesses, I'd like to talk for a
Small
minute.
businesses.
Small business. I'd like to talk for a second about small businesses as a follow-up here. Estate Motors in Golden's Bridge has been under some controversy lately with respect to wetland law violations. What about regulations like that? Do you think those are too much for
I don't think
businesses,
that we
or
should
do you think?
dismiss their accountability to fix the problem. I know we don't want to lose businesses. We don't want people to.
Well, they've also talked about possibly leaving town.
I understand that. But I also think that protecting our natural resources here is job one for everyone, whether you're a resident, a business owner, alike. And I think can I just make one more comment?
Go ahead.
I also have had two other ideas for potentially increasing our tax base, and it may not be huge, but we have some town-owned parcels that are not deemed saleable or usable, and just to maybe offer the landowners adjacent to some of these less than desirable parcels the chance to assume the taxes. Maybe, you have them auctioned off if nobody wants to buy them, but if you transfer the taxes to some people, they may want buffer property. I know that I would like that.
Mr. Kelly, I know
I
that
thought you
you
forgot
are
about me, okay.
adamantly against increasing taxes
Yeah.
in 99% of cases, and I wonder, is there ever anything that you could see that you feel would justify a tax increase?
Sure. And when it comes by, I'll let you know. No, I do. I do, and I do advocate for tax increases where appropriate. But one thing I want to talk about the taxes, the tax rate increase gets all the buzz. But year on year since I've been on the board, we've decreased our expenditures, which is the thing which is in our control, is reducing the town expenditures year on year. Now, the gross housing values, gross assessed values have been declining since the great, pseudo-depression, and there's nothing we can do about that. So the tax rates, as a matter of mathematics, have to climb. Okay, so that's the thing that gets all the press. The thing that's within the board's control is reducing expenditures year on year. And I think we've done a good job of that. And I think when we reduced headcount, I don't believe in mass layoffs or any of this other nonsense. We reduced headcount at an incentive by the state. And I think we're now at an appropriate headcount. And I didn't really like what I heard about reducing more people in the town payroll. we are providing a meager level of service at this point. I think it's just an appropriate level of service that people are expecting. But I don't think that we can go and say, let's eviscerate the town, let's fire 20 people. We won't be able to function as a town. So we need to function. And our people do a good job. We've negotiated union contracts out to 5 years with everybody except one union, and then we've negotiated in good faith to 2 2/3% raises. And that's appropriate, and they do a good job, and they're entitled to it. And so if the mathematics works that we have to pay for our obligations that we negotiated in good faith, and it warrants a marginal tax increase, then it warrants a marginal tax increase. But this wholesale across the board, 18, 20%, just because, oh my God, I can't think of what else to do, that's wrong. That's a non-starter with me. There are appropriate financial instruments, including bonding, which everybody seems to be running with their hair on fire from. If we bonded for the roads when I wanted to a year ago, we would have paid 62 basis points. That's less than 1 point. We are in the lowest decile. 90% of other towns borrow more money than we do.
Mr. Sclarent, the last 2 Democratic town supervisors, including Mr. Parsons, proposed double-digit tax increases during their administration. Is that what we'd expect from the Democrats if you got the control of the town board?
Absolutely not. There's a preliminary budget that's introduced, which gets negotiated and pared down. As we know, the last budget that was submitted by Supervisor Parsons resulted in a final number of 4.7%, which John Pappalardo talked about the town board as a whole doing a great job while preserving essential services. So while the Republicans want to sound the drum as far as 18%, that's not what ended up. And their Republican colleague on the board said that the board worked together and did a great job, speaking of the final product of Parsons' budget. And on that point, I just want to raise a couple things. So the 18 to 20% is disingenuous as far as how things ended up. And what's also disingenuous is the Republican position about talking about over here, we're going to keep your taxes low, but over here, we're going to bond money. During the Mahoney administration, what happened, yes, you had a nice headline in the first couple of years where they didn't raise taxes. But guess what? They took a couple of $1 million from the surplus for purposes of depleting those resources for the town. They didn't tell anybody in the town that they were doing that. They were talking about, well, we kept your taxes low. But meanwhile, the $2 million that was in the bank before is not there now. That part was not talked about because it didn't make a good headline, and that wasn't being forthright with the people.
We have about 5 more minutes in this section. I want to go back to Mr. DeLucia.
Just want to jump and answer that. I mean, when we went from the Mahoney administration into the next Democratic administration, if you look at the financial audits, once again, there was $2.7 million in reserves that went into that next budget. So it was, if you want to say anything, it was a misappropriation of those funds during the following 2 years, which once again, even the Democrat Bruce Pavlov signed a letter with me that also is available online regarding the spending that was going on, okay? At that point in time, that was the issue. So you can't say that that was the case. And you cannot compare, it's apples to oranges, comparing operating expenses to bonding. It's like you saying that, okay, I'm buying a house, I'm going to take out a mortgage, but I have to have the exact same amount of money in that account so I could pay off my mortgage tomorrow. That's not the way bonding works. And also, at this point in time, where we're in one of the most difficult financial times, we're finally climbing out of. Our real estate taxes hopefully will slowly start building up. Our sales taxes will slowly start building up. So if we have our bonds going out right now to do our roads at, as Mr. Kelly explained, some of the lowest numbers in years, as our taxes start coming back in, as that money starts filtering back in the next few years, we could use that to pay off the bond anticipatory notes are what you first take out before you actually go to bond. So these are the financial management things you need to do. And one of the reasons why we were able to get out of our negative rating, which came out of the Brancotti administration, to now a stable rating for our S&P was because of not giant tax increases, because of sound financial management and managing the money spent in the town. And that was part of what's in that report.
Could I respond to that briefly?
Go ahead, and then I want to turn to Ms. Wickersham.
Speaking about ban, is my understanding is the last ban, which was about almost $750,000, in large part goes to pay off the settlement with Scott Pools based upon their suing the town for doing a poor job on the pool renovation project. So that's part of the mismanagement, which has cost the town real money.
But wasn't that, I believe Mr. DeLucia's point, wasn't that part of a prior administration, a prior Democratic administration that inherited that town pool issue?
Excuse me?
Wasn't that part of the Norgren administration going into the Mahoney administration during that time? Wasn't that from a Democratic administration?
The Mahoney administration was dealing with the pool project during a large part of the process when the
But it began with the Norgren administration, isn't that correct?
Contractor was hired, that's correct, but the work was being done during the Mahoney administration.
Ms. Wickersham, your
Yes.
response. The last time I heard this much about bonds, I was watching Skyfall, but if you could just address the issue of bonding versus taxing again.
Oh, again, okay. I know, I understand the whole point about bans versus bonds, I do. And I think that my understanding is that if you have a ban, you're basically sort of refinancing in a way. So it's not that I don't view that a small bond, and I think I've said this, if we needed to get the road work started, I was supportive of bonding at a very, very minimal level, just to get ahead of the curve on the road issue. I did say that, I believe, in the paper. But I am saying in general, we need to migrate away from it and start to put into our annual budgets plans for the things that are of paramount importance to the town. And I do know from the residents, and just as a resident myself, that having sound roads is considered a basic need and something that we shouldn't
Okay,
have to
that's a
plan
good
for.
segue
Speaking
into
of roads, Jane?
And I have a question for Mr. Kelly. Frank,
Yes.
during the discussion of the painting of the yellow roads, that was one of the most contentious, well-attended set of board meetings that we'd had in a long time. And you and the board joined hands and said, this time, these roads are going to be striped for safety issues.
Well, I don't see how we
What
avoid...
happened?
I don't see how we avoid waste. Well, I'll tell you what happened. I told you before. Apparently, there was some meetings that went on with Peter Parsons, Peter Rippinger, and some other people. I was completely marginalized from and not invited to. I'd like to know, and I'd like anybody who thinks they can answer me, how we avoid Weiss v. Fote and how we avoid our obligations. Weiss v. Fote is a Court of Appeals case since 1947, in which basically says when a municipality undertakes to perform a duty, you have to continue to perform that duty appropriately or else you're subject to liability. So we did paint some yellow lines on roads at one point in time. And Peter Rippinger was here, came back to the board asking if he could do it again. Now, I don't, and the way the law works, I don't see how we cannot do it again in terms of the yellow lines that we've already done. I think we need to continue to maintain the ones that have been previously striped. The problem came in, everybody thought we were going to stripe all the way up to their garage door and to the front door and everything else. And that's a problem of communication. And
So
I
you
would
plan to
shed
return.
Peter on it a little bit, and the town board deserves a little bit of it too.
You plan to return to
The plan has to be,
striping.
the plan has to be published, and people have to understand that we're not doing yellow lines up to their house. And in fact, most of the roads are not going to be yellow lines. There's going to be new yellow lines. I don't see how we avoid maintaining what we've done, because in the absence of a new study, we're obliged to maintain road markings where we've made road markings.
So you have no intention, you and the board, I just won't put it all on you, of throwing up your hands and walking away from the yellow lines
I don't throw up
issue.
my hands and walk away from anything. What I've asked Peter to do, and we asked him a long time ago, I'm sorry to woodshed you, Pete, but, we need a plan. We need a plan, and we need to look at the plan. You can't just come and say, town board, take this over. And the plan has to be published. I'm sorry, people misunderstood. Like I said, everybody thought everything was going to be yellow lined, which is simply not the case.
Mr. Sklaryn, which side of the yellow line do you come down on?
I'm not following the yellow brick or yellow line road on this one. My position on, as I said before, is the fact that I don't believe that there's a demonstrated correlation between doing that and safety, as the people in Wacabuck have talked about. And number two, the cost is something that's, whatever it is something that could be saved. And number three, the people in the community do not want it. They live there, and I think there is a potential argument with a correlation between the yellow lines and real estate values. At least if that potential is there, and there's no demonstrated safety correlation, then I don't think it should be done, and that money shouldn't be spent.
Mr. DeLucia, are you in the middle of the road on yellow lines?
I'm not in the middle of the road. I've made my point clear a number of years ago after yellow lines magically appeared one night in town. I had sent a letter to the Mead Street residents and people about that I'm totally against yellow lines unless there's an engineering study. They are mandated by the Department of Transportation, and we're not going to get our CHIPS money. And we didn't really talk about CHIPS money, but CHIPS money is money that is given to us. We talk about an unfunded mandate. Roads are slightly funded. We do get CHIPS money. We get over $100,000 a year. I think this year we're getting close to $200,000. So there's no reason to add additional stripes to stress anybody out, especially on roads if it's not going to be a safety issue. One of the things with Mead Street, it's straight as an arrow. I don't see why we're even looking to do anything like that if it's not going to be mandatory and not going to stop us from getting any funding. So it's very important to understand that there's a process. And I think Jane alluded to the meetings being contentious. I'm glad that people came out. That's what the process is for. That's why we're here as town board members. And one of the earlier questions is about getting involved with your community. We want to hear what the community had to say, and the Wakaba community voiced their opinion loud and clear that they don't want any lines on their streets. Well, you know what? If it's not going to cost the town any money, it's not going to be a safety hazard, and it's not going to affect our emergency personnel, why are we even looking to paint lines there? I think we should talk about more serious things.
Ms. Wickersham, I have run out of puns on the yellow line issue, but if you could address the issue
Yes, briefly. I hate to say he took my answer, but I do agree with Pete about the fact that there's not a one-size-fits-all with yellow lines. I think that topography plays into it. I think the curvature of a road, all these kinds of things, and based on a study to bear it out, would be the rationale for putting a line on a road. I also think, you look at history in terms of accidents, near misses, and those kinds of things. It felt as though that the lines that were bandied about a few months ago, it seemed arbitrary to me that there was a list of roads, and I frankly didn't understand how those roads were selected, but I do think that you should never go through with a one-size-fits-all on that.
I'd like to just continue on the topic of roads for just a minute. Mr. DeLucia, in a February 27th letter to the Lewisboro Ledger, Republican Party Chair Andrea Rendo stated that funding for road repair is, and I quote, more properly funded through a bond offering rather than an annual budget item, so that, and I quote again, this would guarantee the money is actually used for our roads. Can Lewisboro voters trust our town board to use money raised by taxes for the purposes they say they'll use them for?
I believe the Lewisboro residents should have faith in their town board members to spend money where it is said to be spent. But on the same note, when you raise taxes, that money goes into the general fund. That money can be used for multiple things, and it gets appropriated across budget lines. For the first year, if you're saying you're raising taxes for a certain amount of money to pave the roads, let's say, you're going to budget that across those budget lines. The next year, depending on what the status of the town is, what's going on, there might be another project that takes precedence or something, that money could be removed. If you do a bond issuance for a capital project and doing roads, not road repair, not filling potholes. No one's ever saying we're bonding to fill potholes. Once again, we're getting almost $200,000 a year this year in CHIPS money to pave roads, fill potholes, and do things like that. And we always have additional money for pothole. But if you're going to do a capital project, such as looking to repave X amount of miles to get us back on track of where we need to be, you could put a fence around that money and make sure that money is spent on doing the roads.
Mr. Sclaren, general tax increases aren't earmarked for any particular projects. Isn't that a case for a bond offering, as the Republicans are arguing, for road repair?
Well, in hearing what Mr. DeLucia said, on one hand he says, trust us how we spend the money, on the other hand, don't trust us because we need to have a bond dedicated to it. I think that the project should be put, depending on the scope of it, and as was mentioned before, we're in the relative infancy, we're finding out what the costs are going to be, and we just had the Cornell study. But depending on what is adopted by the board as far as the scope of it, it may be something that we want to consider going to referendum on in the same way that the school district has on a project of this size. That way, as I've said before, we know exactly what's going to be spent, we know exactly the scope of the project, we know exactly what the cost is going to be, and then we have input from the entire community that we have majority support for it.
But that would be a referendum on a bond issue, right? Not on a tax increase.
Well, it would be a referendum. I don't know if it would be, actually, I don't know the exact procedure on it. If it would be a referendum on a tax bond, then it would be, but it's a referendum where you're getting community involvement as opposed to just bonding without community involvement.
Mr. Kelly, your response.
A tax referendum would be fine with respect to the bonding. It doesn't really matter to me. The thing is, a tax increase does go to the general fund, and any old buddy can spend it any old way. Money raised through a bond offering is allocated to the purpose of the bond, which would be roads. And they're sunsetted. A bond can be for 5 years, in which case the geometric and organic accretion of the bond of the tax rate doesn't just continue to make somebody's cookie jar forever. The bond ends at a certain point, in which case you have to pay it back. So the project ends. So you get to reevaluate what your next project is. If it's a continuation of roads, then you reassess the money that you're required to bond for the road, and you do the work pursuant to the bond proceeds, and you pay it back. And at some time it comes to an end, which is quite unlike tax increases, which seem to go on forever.
I'd actually, with the time we have left, and we have about 20 minutes left in the debate, I'd like to turn to the issue of housing. And I'd like to ask Ms. Wickersham, About 10 years ago, the town government borrowed about $1 million from Westchester County to acquire open space. In exchange for that money, the town government entered into an agreement to build 121 affordable housing units. Since that time, no affordable housing units have been built under that agreement. If we're not going to build those units, should the town government pay the money back?
Actually, if we were on the hook to build the affordable housing units with that money, and it was earmarked for that, I would think that a lot of discussion has to be had before that money's spent on something else.
It was actually money that was borrowed to acquire open space.
Okay, open space.
Old Meadow.
Oldfield.
Oldfield Preserve.
Oh, Oldfield Preserve.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, all right. No, I don't believe so. I think it's sort of a separate issue. The fact that we had Oldfield Preserve and that was acquired as open space, that, and we were also committed to building the affordable housing. I think the question is, where can we put the affordable housing that makes sense? This town is special and unique in that its natural resources, clean water, woodlands, biotic corridors are, what we protect. So if we had a way of adding affordable housing that wouldn't jeopardize those things, that's what we ought to do. I don't know how easy it's been. I think that the best thing we can do is negotiate and see if there are other ways and other alternatives. But net new housing, what units, number of units did you say?
121.
121, net new. Frankly, I can't even imagine where we have the space to do that.
Mr. Sclaren, this was entered into under a Republican administration when you were chairman of the Republican Party. Does the town government owe that money back after not building these units for the last 10 years?
No, it doesn't, J.D. As I believe you're aware, the contract talk about making good faith efforts.
And you
to
think
build
there's been a good
units.
faith effort?
Well, according to my understanding,
There have been
over the
no
years, there
housing
has
units
been.
built.
But there's been good faith efforts, and part of the problem is the fact that other outside governments have not given the credit that they should, based upon the housing that has been developed in town. The fact that the accessory apartments has always been an issue as far as not getting the credit that we should. The fact that we have 37 middle-income units in our town, those have not given the proper credit. So there was the agreement talked about making good faith efforts. I think that's 10 years ago, and I think that the town has made good faith efforts under the existing framework, under the existing circumstances, in light of our environmental realities, and in light of the fact that we're in the watershed, to comply with the agreement. So in answer to your question, no, I don't think we owe the money back.
Mr. DeLucia, your response.
I can tell you that we don't owe the money back, and we don't have the obligation, according to Peter Harcum. I think those of you that remember, AP Farms is now built across the street from the high school. It's beautiful fields, but before those fields were built, they were looking to, the Brancato administration was looking to use legacy money from the county to be able to build the fields. Part of the deal, if we had took that legacy money at the time, we were going to owe additional housing. Along with the legacy money, they always looked to couple that with housing, and they looked to couple that with us actually paving the roads in Ward Pound Ridge. At that point in time, we had a public hearing discussing that over at the Lewisboro Elementary School, and I remember it well because Mr. Harcum was there along with other gentlemen from the county, and they were discussing about the housing numbers. And I asked him point blank at that point in time, I said, Mr. Harcum, we still have this good faith effort that was involved and invoked during the Oldfield Preserve language on housing. Has that been satisfied, or is this going to be cumulative? He says, no, that has been satisfied. We've looked at this, and as long as you document the housing you have at Oak Ridge and the other units that are in Vista, all of our housing units right now are in Vista, and we do have many moderate income units in that area. Those count. Those will count, and at this point in time, you have no obligation. So I said, okay, so going forward now, when we make a decision tonight, because we were going to vote on whether or not we should take the legacy money that night, it'll all be fresh. Yes. At that point in time, the entire board, including the supervisor who had brought the legacy money to our attention, voted against taking the money to be on the hook for any more housing, and that ended it that evening. So I think Mrs. Rendo, who's running for county legislator, should really hold Peter's feet to the fire on that one, because it really was said that evening. It's in the record, and it's in the minutes.
Jane?
Okay, Frank, under the settlement of the HUD lawsuit, Westchester County agreed to spend $51 million to build affordable housing. I'm reading it because I got the numbers right here. In municipalities with fewer than 3% African American residents and fewer than 7% Hispanic residents. Lewisboro is one of the communities, and its stated goal here is 239 affordable housing units. Is there anywhere in town that you see these units could be erected?
No.
Okay?
239,
That's a short,
we
simple
can't put
answer.
239 units anywhere here. And a couple of things that you point out are meaningful. The county settled a lawsuit that involved the county. It didn't involve Lewisboro. Lewisboro was not a defendant in the lawsuit, and we're not bound and obliged under anything that's signed by somebody else. There's aspirational goals for affordable housing by the urban development, housing and urban development. We are anything but urban here in Lewisboro. And I think if we talk about rural preservation department, maybe we'd have something to say. There is no open space sufficient to build 231 units or whatever the number is. That's an aspirational number besides. We do in town probably have a need for senior aging in place and first responder housing. We do have some housing stock that is deemed affordable, but we can't build this large tract satisfaction of what they're trying to accomplish. And the moderator was up here not too long ago, and I think they've assessed maybe 4.5 acres of buildable space. They came here and saw that we have a lot of wetlands, steep slopes, and things like that. And it's not just green woodland for the mowing down and building of urban developments, and it's not appropriate for our town, and we can't handle that. And we have, under a matter of home rule, we have other things to do first. Home rule has been just recently reinforced by the Court of Appeals in one of the fracking cases from upstate here. And home rule is a constitutional right of our town to determine our own zoning. And our zoning is not discriminatory. And I resent that they claim that it is. It has nothing to do with discrimination based on demography. It has solely to do with preserving our open space and our wetlands and things like that.
Well, what do you think a reasonable number to you could be built in the town of Lewisboro?
I couldn't really tell you. A reasonable number of what? Of first responder housing, senior housing? I don't know. I'm not an architect. I couldn't tell you that. It would require an appropriate water situation, appropriate sewage, infrastructure. It would require a market, various different, I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that.
Ms. Wickersham, your response on this?
My response is, I think that we need to, and I've said this many times, look at existing vacated space. There are homes in foreclosure, there are abandoned homes in some cases, accessory apartments that don't qualify. We need to understand why they don't and what we can do about it. I'm really not a fan of putting shovels to the ground, to be honest with you. I think we ought to just maximize the space we have, make sure that it would be appropriate for families and have access to the various services that we all enjoy in town.
I'd like to actually go to Mr. Sklarin for a question on this and actually have it asked of each one of you here.
Can I answer the question that's on the table?
30 seconds, sure.
Okay, thanks. I agree with Frank that we can't build 239 units in the same way we can't build 120. And what Frank said is correct. We're not bound to this agreement because the agreement was between the county and the federal government. Yet, it hasn't stopped the Republicans up and down the line from trying to scare people by talking about that the federal government is going to try and dismantle your local zoning. So on one hand, Frank makes the proper point that we're not party to that agreement. On the other hand, Republicans are trying to instill fear in
Okay, I'm
everybody.
going to exercise questions privilege here and ask you a follow-up here. For more affordable housing units to be built, more land would have to be zoned to accommodate them, and that means localities like ours, which under the New York State Constitution are empowered to make zoning decisions, they would have to change their zoning practices and make decisions they wouldn't otherwise make. I mean, is it your contention that the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency has no jurisdiction with respect to Lewisboro zoning practices? Because that's certainly not the position of Westchester County, or as I understand it, your county executive candidate.
What I'm saying is I think that the New York State Constitution guarantees home rule, which includes authority over local zoning. And nothing about that I'm aware of that the federal government, they have said that they're trying to dismantle local zoning and impinge upon the rights which are guaranteed by the New York State Constitution. But as far as building units, I don't favor doing something we simply cannot do. It's something that's an impossibility in this town. And I think that people outside of this community are aware of the environmental realities and the fact that we're in the watershed, and the fact that these things simply cannot be done. And it's part of what the town should do and has been doing is to ensure that people who are overseeing that settlement and making sure that it's implemented are aware of the realities in our town, and we can't do what we
I'm
can't
going to actually start the round robin question with you, Mr.
Okay.
Sclaren. HUD has concluded that municipalities in Westchester County engage in exclusionary zoning practices, that Westchester municipalities design their housing rules to exclude people based on their race and ethnicity. Do you believe that when Lewisboro homeowners put their houses on the market, that they discriminate against buyers of a different race or ethnicity?
In answer to your question, JD, I absolutely do not believe that Lewisboro's zoning is exclusionary. This community or any of the other 7 that they were talking about. There is nothing discriminatory in what people are doing in selling their houses.
Then what's the basis for the lawsuit?
Excuse me?
Then what's the basis for the lawsuit if people aren't discriminating based on race?
As far as what the county
As far as what the county is doing? I mean, if you're saying people aren't discriminating based on race, then why is the question of building affordable housing for minorities even coming up?
Your question to me was whether I believe that our local zoning code is exclusionary.
No, I asked whether
do not.
Lewisboro homeowners discriminate based on.
No, the answer is no, of course not.
Ms. Wickersham.
I don't think so at all.
Mr. Kelly?
Absolutely not, and I resent the implication.
Mr. DeLucia?
Absolutely not, and I resent the implication also. And I think what's key, what's
It's not my implication, by the
No,
way.
no, I know that,
Housing and
no,
Urban
but I think
Development Corporation.
what's disturbing to me is what Mr. Sclaren is saying about not dismantling the zoning code. It's right there. It's right there in the settlement that the county is to propose their model zoning code, which Mrs. Wickersham made a nice comment about vacated space. Maybe we could do like Peter Harkam's old company used to do, come in, make a couple of bedroom home and make affordable housing. No, that's not what they're looking to do. They're looking to take our zoning code and take first right of refusal, which means when that vacant property gets foreclosed, the county has to give that to HUD for the opportunity to build on that property. That's what that means. It means all the work that we did as a board and that I did to make sure that our first responders, our volunteer firefighters and ambulance corps are on our priority list in our zoning code are now thrown to the side. And that these houses that are built then on that property are marketed to everybody outside of not only Lewisboro, not only outside of the county, outside of anywhere in Westchester, that there's a lottery for who would get these houses. And you know what? Yonkers said the same thing, Richard. Oh, no, this couldn't happen. And then there was a judge called Judge Sands that came in and put housing and took away your neighborhood schools and had your kids bust all over the city of Yonkers because they said nothing could happen and the board was blind to it. I think we have to be very careful and step very carefully through this minefield right now and make sure, as Mr. Kelly said, we exercise our home rule and our best judgment in Lewisboro before this happens.
Mr. Sclaren, I'm going to give you the right of response here since he addressed that to you.
That's exactly what the Republicans are trying to do. This is not Yonkers and the desegregation case going back 30 years ago. That's not what this is about, and that was a lawsuit dealing was within the community.
But it is about discrimination, isn't it? I mean, that's what the HUD lawsuit is about.
The HUD lawsuit is about part of what, the lawsuit is talking in part about things like different zoning. We have 4-acre, 2-acre, 1-acre. They're making.
But zoning that discriminates based on race and ethnicity. I mean, that's the basis of the HUD lawsuit, isn't that correct?
That's part of the allegations, and I don't believe that it's true. It's absolutely
But that's
not.
how Westchester County settled it.
Well,
saying that
Westchester
they-
County settled based upon an agreement to build 750 units throughout the county, and they're moving forward on that.
With respect to coming to Lewisboro, and, I mean, do you think that the county has jurisdiction here with respect to enforcing the settlement?
Do I think that the county has jurisdiction? I think that we should maintain our local control over our zoning, period. I think we should make our best efforts to do, to the extent possible, market-based housing opportunities in light of what our existing infrastructure and in light of what our existing housing stock is. We cannot do what is physically impossible to do. And
Ms.
that's the bottom
Wickersham,
line.
your running mate said that we should use market-based opportunities to try to address this. Does the market discriminate based on race?
No, not at all. I think that the fact that we haven't been able to produce these units is probably being interpreted as such. But, the fact is, we can't build net new. There's nowhere to do it. If we can identify other space, as I keep trying to encourage, we would make, I would think, baby steps. We may move in the right direction.
Mr. Kelly, 30 seconds, then we're going to move to our last topic.
Is the market transaction in Lewisboro discriminatory? The answer is no. If you have $1, you can spend your dollar in Lewisboro without any fear of discriminatory action. Does HUD have jurisdiction? Probably not. They're a federal government, I get it, but unless they can come down here and do some other kinds of things, they don't have the jurisdiction to reach in and call our zoning discriminatory in the absence of some kind of affirmative showing that that is so. To simply say that the numbers preclude something else is inappropriate.
We have about 8 minutes left, and this week we asked readers of the Lewisboro Ledger to send in questions that they would like to ask, and not surprisingly, the one topic that has consistently come up in a variety of forms was the issue that the school board is considering tonight, which is the topic of closing one of our elementary schools. I'd like to ask each of you, give you a minute as to what your view is on this and the possible impact on the town, and we'll start with Ms. Wickersham.
I'm not happy about the prospect of closing LES, and that's the school in question. I live around the block from it. I think that a dead school does nothing for property values. And it's also a sad story about enrollment and the fact that the taxes are so high, and it's kind of hard to get out of our own way with the school taxes. I do think, though, if we must do it, I think we need to take action to make sure that the building is occupied and stays viable. To mothball a space of that capacity would be wasteful, and I just think if we do have to go this route, we ought to start putting our heads together on how to use the space, even if it's a temporary solution. I understand that the school board is saying it might just be a temporary closure, and there's ways to use temporary space on a temporary basis.
Mr. Sclaren.
Part of what I think we need to find out, if it's possible, is going out more than 5, 10, and 15 years. In other words, if a school has to be closed on a short-term basis, do we know, based upon generational turnover, we'll be able to reopen it down the road? Part of what's problematic in the closure that they're contemplating is that out of approximately $117 million budget, the projected savings by the superintendent is between $2.25 and $2.9 million, and that money, which is tentative savings, impossible savings. That money is not guaranteed to be saved, and that money is not guaranteed to go back into the budget. Part of the issue, as it has been, is the fact that it's costs on a going forward basis. We have a situation where 40-some-odd people in our school district are making $145,000 or more. Part of the problem in the last year is that there were increased pension contributions of close to $2 million. Our problem is, and the biggest problem is the fact that in our community we spend approximately $1,500 more per pupil compared to what's supposed to be comparable districts by Armonk and Chappaqua. I believe we should spend good money on our students, but it should be value-based. We're spending close to $30,000 per student in our community, and compared to places like Armonk and Chappaqua, we're spending about $1,500 more per student, and I don't know, based upon objective evaluation of these people, we're getting anything more. There was something in the Wall Street Journal recently which was talking about $15 billion in additional teacher salaries, which go to automatic salary increases for advanced degrees that teachers get without any correlation to increased performance of students.
Mr. Kelly.
Lewisboro Elementary School should not be closed. The disparate impact on our town would be devastating. The housing values would crater, the housing transactions would freeze, and the town relies on mortgage tax receipts in large measure to provide the meager level of services that we do provide. Nobody's going to buy a house here where your kid has to commute an hour on the bus. That's ridiculous. We should share the pain, and Lewisboro Elementary School should not close.
Mr. DeLucia.
I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Kelly, and to build upon that, as a town board, as town board members, we have a responsibility. We are the voice of the people. We might not have direct control over what happens, what the school board does or what the school superintendent does, but we do have control to be able to voice our opinion, get together as a board, and I call for our current town board at our next meeting to sit down and discuss this and draft a letter to the school board saying that this is not good for our community, this is not good for our town. Mr. Sclaren mentioned the minuscule amount of savings it would be. That alone with the busing would be eaten up. And on top of that, the impact, as Mr. Kelly stated, on our home values throughout our town in this most sensitive time is going to put a crater in our town budget along with our school budget, increasing the fact that I've got 9-year-old twins that were very much affected by what happened in Sandy Hook and other events that happened in this town, and they're very comfortable in their local elementary school. To now uproot the children from LES and move them into other schools and possibly move other students from those schools to other schools,
excuse me, Mr. DeLucia,
it's not the thing to do.
I'm going to ask you, are you really equating the closing of a possible elementary school in this town to the Sandy Hook massacre?
What I'm equating is that our children have been through enough. Why uproot them? There's a new curriculum right now. All of us that are parents right now that are have kids in grammar school, there's a brand new curriculum that now just got introduced to the children in the school that the teachers are still working on to be able to do those lesson plans. Is this something that the children need at this point in time in their lives? Is this something we want Lewisboro to be known as? So we want people to move into our town. We don't want people to take a Lewisboro, oh my God, they're involved with a housing situation, they're involved with school closures, oh my God, put the hex on Lewisboro, we're going to go move somewhere else. That's not the kind of town we want to live in. This is a catastrophic mistake right now for the school board to propose this.
Let me just say one thing, I'm sorry, on the tax implications of this. If housing prices go down 25% or something like that, the tax rate would have to rise so much in this town, in the disparate affected part of the district, that any savings, the 2.25 tip that they'll save over for closing LES, will be eaten up instantly by our own town tax increase.
Yeah, since Mr. Kelly had 2 shots at that, I'm going to give Mr. Sklar and Ms. Wickersham any last comments on that, because we got about 2 minutes left.
Go first.
Okay. I think that Councilman DeLucia is very much overstating the issue. As I said before, we have to first evaluate what the savings are going to be and what the projections are going to be as far as the demographics. If a school needs to be closed, for how long would it need to be closed? And then we have to move forward from that point.
Ms. Wickersham, you get the last word.
Okay. I think that keeping the school open when it's not in a place of growth and prosperity is maybe not the best thing. I think we really have to look at this thing and not make the assumption that the kids can't adjust and that we can't rebound from this. I think that the school board's trying very hard to weigh the options and to look at the causes and effect of closing versus staying open. And I think we ought to just wait till their analysis is complete before we jump all over it.
Now, speaking of closings, what do you think, each of you in turn, of Estate Motors talking about throwing up its hands and giving up on the project they've been working on for something like a decade? Do you think the town should make efforts to try to keep them at it, or should we just say, well, if you want to go, go?
15 seconds each, according to our director over here. Mr. Sklar.
I think we should do what we can to keep Estate Motors in town. And I also think that we should do what we can to make sure that Estate Motors remediates the longstanding problems of neighbors referable to flooding.
Ms. Wickersham?
I answered the question earlier, but it's basically the same. They should be held accountable to clean up their mess.
Mr. Kelly?
Always good to keep talking, and we should keep them at it. They actually did present a plan for amelioration of the water runoff in front of us at one point in time about 8-10 months ago. There are options and things to do. It would be very unfortunate to lose them. Talking is always good.
Mr. DeLucia?
I think we should keep the dialogue open. I think Estate Motors has gone through a lot of the process. I mean, it goes back to when I was on the zoning board back, prior to being on the town board in 2003, 2004. I think they're a necessity to have up there to actually have a thriving business, because I think that's another perfect site for HUD to take a look at for housing if they vacate that. So I think it's very imperative that we work with them to try to stay.
And with that, this town board debate comes to a close. I'd like to again thank the staff of the Lewisboro Library and Lewisboro Community Television, and we'll take a break for a moment and resume with our town supervisor debate. Thank the candidates for
Thank you.
the library for the second half of our town board debate, tonight featuring the town supervisor candidates. On the left-hand side of your screen, the incumbent candidate of the Democratic, Working Families, and Independence parties, Mr. Peter Parsons, and the challenger, candidate of the Republican and Conservative Party, Mr. Thomas Frischetti. The first question is from Jane Dove to Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Parsons, when you ran initially, you had a very strong plank in your platform focused on uniting the town and bringing us together, ending divisiveness. What do you think you have accomplished in that area?
I think I've accomplished quite a lot. I think basically by using civility and a certain amount of manners in town meetings, the tone of voice has improved, and so the productivity has improved. Because if you can produce a reasonably good tone of voice, you get a reasonably good result in terms of debate. I also meant community, though not just in terms of the town board.
Right.
I meant it in terms of getting volunteers to move things ahead in this town. In particular, it's fairly well known that I'm passionate about the preserves. And we have managed to get together an amazing group of volunteers to work minor miracles in the preserves. That is true community spirit.
Thank you.
Mr. Frechetta, your response.
I think he's done an admirable job about that. The volunteerism in our town is probably at all-time highs, which is very important to my family, specifically when it comes to volunteering as a person. I've been involved in many volunteer organizations throughout my life, specifically the Boy Scouts of America. I've been involved in the St. Mary's Christmas Dinner for the last 15 years. I'm a member of the South Salem Fire Department, where these groups work together. So being a volunteer is very important to me. I applaud the volunteers in our town, and I like the direction they're going.
Mr. Fischetti, the town of Lewisboro hasn't re-elected a town supervisor in a contested election since the 1990s. Since 2003, we have had 4 one-term town supervisors, 7 one-term town board members. Would the town of Lewisboro benefit from having experienced people on the town board?
Change all the time is not necessarily a good thing all the time, but change is inevitable and it's needed. I think each one of those reasons why those town supervisors or those town board members left for various reasons, and the reasons are withstand, they're documented in different places. I think change is a good thing. I think change at this point is an inevitable, and I think it's needed at this current junction.
Well, you say change is needed. You're running with 2 people who are running for re-election, one of whom has been re-elected twice. Is change a good thing all the time?
That's correct. I was directly speaking about the supervisor's position. I was not addressing the position of town board members.
Could you explain why those are different?
Yes. The town supervisor position is a 2-year term. 2 years ago at this time, or a year ago at this time, the budget was proposed. They were discussing it right here. Mr. Parsons, in the talk, spoke about a $360,000 increase in the health insurance benefits, along with the $250,000 he needed at the time to repair the roads. The suggestion was an 18.25% tax. At that point, there was discussion about addressing the health insurance needs. Mr. Kelly is on record asking that numerous times. It is only being, as I understand, being addressed at this point. Unfortunately, I think it's a little too late to do that. I think it should have been done earlier, before we get to the late season of doing the budget right now.
Mr. Parsons, your response.
Okay. First of all, I'm going to answer your first question first, rather than respond to...
You can respond any way you'd like. It's your time.
When I came into this office, there was sort of hidden problems all around the place. I have spent most of my first 18 months grappling with grants that we were in danger of missing, work that we were under the gun to get done and hadn't done. And quite honestly, that was not the fault of any one supervisor in particular. It was the fault of changing supervisors so frequently that nobody knew which end was up. And we had pretty average chaos in the town administration. And let's understand something. About 95% of the work in that office is pure admin, which has nothing to do really with politics. And when we screw that up, we screw up the town. Second thing, you came round to taxes. All right. And specifically, you came to insurance. During the time I've been supervisor, or when I came in, one of the first things I realized is that we had a disastrous health plan which could turn really sour on us. Since then, I've worked and been successful. I've worked with others to change that health plan so that there is a level of reinsurance to protect the town from disaster. Secondly, we went out and we talked to a variety of people to come up with alternative plans. 2 people came back with a high deductible plan, which is which nobody has managed to sell to any union in the country. There were 3 other town plans, and 2 of those are still in the running.
Mr. Fischetti, your response.
It's unfortunate that when Mr. Parsons came into office, that there were these unknown things that he spoke about. As I've been walking around town, meeting some of you folks and talking to you, one of the things I've recognized was the level of intelligence and the dedication that we have in our town. If I am elected, what I will do for the first 2 months, November and December, I will have a full transition team to meet with all of the department heads and various people throughout the town, so that on the day of the first day in the office, I will know where our exposures are, where the problems are, and what are the things that are going to hurt us the most. One thing I'd like to address. In the town of Lewisboro, we buy gravel every year. I don't know how much we actually buy. It's the number of tons we buy. We have to get 5 bids for that. Health insurance is the number 2 cost behind salaries. I think it's a travesty that we only had 2 people look at this, to look at it. I think there should be more people doing it. I've made a couple of phone calls to some of the major carriers in the United States. They're willing to talk to us. I'd like to address one thing he did bring up, and that's the fact about the reinsurance. One of the issues with our town is we have a very high deductible that the town is responsible for paying. That number is approximately $75,000 per family. There's an aggregate amount that we may hit, but it does stop. So he is correct that we will not have a catastrophic number. However, our town budget is so tight that an extra $75,000 or $100,000 is not accounted for. That would have to come out of the reserve fund to pay for that, or hope that it doesn't happen. The fact that it even exists is an issue with me. That we should not be in the insurance business. We should work with our unions, learn the contracts that they have, the obligations we have, speak to the major carriers, exclude working with brokers, because there is no reason to pay a broker a commission when we can go directly to the major carriers who are willing to work with our town.
Mr. Parsons, I want to get back to the issue we raised in the last debate. No matter which one of you wins, the likelihood is that you'll be dealing with members of the other party on the town board. How do you build rapport with members of the opposition party?
The way I have. I mean, I don't think it's a huge secret that I and Peter DeLucia talk regularly, that quite honestly, we look for places where we can move the ball forward, and when it's quite obvious that, there's a brick wall, there's no point in wasting time and breath on trying to attack it. You need to figure out what can be done and get it done. And that's how you build rapport with each individual on the board.
Mr. Fischetti, your response.
I think rapport is a great thing. I applaud Mr. Parsons for the work he's done with getting along with people. This town is made up of a unique group of people that want to live here for certain reasons. As I've been walking this town, I've met a lot of you. I've met a lot of people that disagree with some of my views, and some of them may agree with me. But one thing I did learn, we have some great people in this town. I've met with many of the people who are running in town. I've met with Richard. I've talked with him many times. It's Richard Sclaren. I think we have a wonderful rapport. We may disagree on certain things, but we do get along quite well. I think it's something that needs to continue. I think it's a wonderful aspiration to have, and I would certainly bring that along at any town board meetings that I would hold.
Mr. Fischetti, for the last few elections, Republican candidates have run on a platform of keeping town taxes low, but they have increased more than 40% over the last few years. If you're elected, what do you think you could do to keep town taxes low, since that is a basic Republican GOP tenet?
When I was a young boy, one of the things my mother used to say to me was, if I can trust you with small things, I can trust you with big things. One of the things I would like to do as your supervisor is to bring in an efficiency expert. These are people that look line by line without having any say on what they are, to decide and look at and come up with better ways to save money. There are a number of line items that I've looked at on the budget that I think we can improve on. And I think by having an outside expertise help us look at that, would do that. Number 2, looking at our health insurance benefits, working with the unions, understanding the contracts that they have, I think is another way we can save money. So before we speak about raising taxes, before we speak about offering a band or a bond, I think we have to get our own house in order first to understand how much revenue we have, what our expenses are, and only then can we talk about furthering bonds or raising taxes.
What are
Mr.
some of
Fischetti,
the line items
I'm sorry, go
that
ahead.
you're referring to? Because to my knowledge, you're practically down to what type of paper clips you buy.
Jane, that's an excellent question. One of the things I looked at was particularly printers. Now, printers are not something that sounds like it's a lot of money, but the town spends in excess of $18,000 a year on printers. Is that a reasonable amount? I'm not sure. Could it be less? Could be. But I think something like that along the lines could be something that we can address. Now, $10,000 may not be a lot of money we save, but it's a start, it's a drop in the bucket, and we can build off that.
Mr. Fischetti, I want to probe you a little more on this question about an efficiency expert. You're running for re-election with a town councilman who has 8 years of experience, another town councilman who has 4 years of experience. If you're elected to the town board, you'll join a Democrat who has almost 5 years of experience and a Republican town board member who has almost 3 years of experience. With all that experience on the town board, do you really need to hire an efficiency expert to tell you where to cut in the town government?
JD, it's not a matter of hiring this person. These people do not get paid unless they save you money. Derek Jeter himself is one of the best baseball players of our time. He has a coach, he has a batting coach and a fielding coach. If a man like Derek Jeter can improve himself with accolades like that, I think it's easy enough to think that our town can improve itself as well.
Well, as much as I respect Derek Jeter, I mean, you do have people who have almost 20 years of experience. None of them have hired efficiency experts the last few years. In the prior debate we just heard, none of them mentioned having an efficiency expert hired to tell them how to cut the town budget. Do you really think you need one?
JD, when I decided to run for this position, the one person I needed the final vote from was my wife. And I said, you know me better than anybody on the face of this earth, including my mother. I said, I need to know from you if you think I should run. She thought about it and said, I know you should run. I said, what is the basis for it? Why do you think it is? She goes, you think so far out of the box about repairing things, fixing things, and coming up with ideas. You don't even know the box exists. So when coming up with an efficiency expert, if my colleagues have not thought about it, maybe that's the reason why I'm working with them.
Mr. Parsons, your response.
Let's go back, first of all, to the healthcare statement.
Please.
Just as a matter of fact, if we stay with our current system, healthcare costs will go down by over 10% next year, which is a significant saving. And quite honestly, one of the reasons why it has become harder to figure out quite where to go at this point, because I hadn't really expected a 10% decrease. Because that's not what history has been giving us.
Okay.
An efficiency expert? Okay, fine, hire an efficiency expert. I don't think that you are going to find very much in a town where you've already got department heads working exceptionally hard to not just to run their departments, but to do the basic work inside their departments. Somebody may come back and say you need more people because then you'd improve your customer service or something. But I don't think you're going to save much money.
Mr. Fischetti, your response.
I believe it was in sometime around the 1920s, someone made a statement that we should close the patent office because everything we wanted in life had been developed. I'm glad they didn't do that because companies like Apple and IBM would not exist today. As far as this efficiency expert, we can banter this back and forth all night, but the fact of the matter is, if we can improve our town, improve our expenses in any way, in any shape, that it's not going to cost us money, I think we should do it. If the efficiency expert tells us that we need to hire someone, that's a decision the town board would make, along with the representatives from those particular departments he's making that for. So because an efficiency expert tells us he makes his recommendation, it is not something we need to take into effect into our town.
Jane?
Mr. Parsons, going back to an old battle between the Republican and the Democrats on the town board with the roads, borrowing versus bonding, do you think that there is any way that a resolution of this can come about that might be like the hybrid version you proposed recently, where you forget about supporting the whole thing with taxes and forget about supporting the whole thing with borrowing and do some combination of the two approaches, a hybrid approach, if you were? Do you think that that could work? Do you think you could get the votes you need to make that happen.
I hope I can. I don't know I can, but I hope I can. We have taken a big step forward. We have got a specific plan for the roads we need to work on in 2014. That is a monumental step forward versus a year ago. Second, everybody talks about bonding gaily, but remember, the $3 million bond, which was raised, I don't know, 6 years ago, there were two problems with that bond. We're still paying $330,000 a year in non-productive costs, if you like, to pay off that bond. And it goes on for a very considerable period of time. So our highway budget is inflated by that $330 a year. Secondly, having sworn when we raised that $3 million that we would maintain our roads and keep on putting money in on an annual basis, we stopped putting 1 sou into road repaving and of the town money. We relied entirely on CHIPS money, and the result has been, well, look at it, just drive around the roads of the town. And, we're really behind the 8 ball.
Mr. Fischetti, are you for full borrowing, full bonding? The road work?
I think before we get to that point of deciding bond versus taxing, we have to first clean up and understand our real finances. I applaud Mr. Parsons for starting to work on the health insurance costs of our town. I'm glad it happened. I wish it would have happened in last year's budget so we wouldn't have to deal with it again this year. But the fact of the matter is, we do have costs in our town budget that I think need to be addressed. When it comes to bonding, as he spoke about earlier, the $3 million bond, we have a couple of roads that were done with that bond. Number one, Chapel.
Oh, a lot of roads.
Yes.
No, not Chapel.
Chapel was not one of those?
No.
Okay.
This bond, the bond was finished literally about 5 years ago. And Chapel was done entirely with state money.
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Mr. Parsons, for clearing that up. I appreciate that. I know not on who had those bonds, who called for those bonds, who took it to issuance. But I know, but I know this. Any bond that's issued while I am the supervisor will be fenced for one use and one use only, and that will be paying for the road surfacing and repairing the roads.
That bond was fenced. It was all spent on roads. I'm not saying that they didn't spend the $3 million on roads. I'm saying that they made that, after that had happened, they just slashed the road repaving budget to essentially zero because they'd just done all this work using a bond. All right, what do I really think we can go forward from here? Yes, I think we should. I know I can't get the board's approval to raise taxes by $95 a household in order to do roads. Granted that, I'm going to suggest we go one step at a time and we raise taxes by let's say $30 a household this year and bond for the remainder, raise it another $30 and bond for the remainder, raise it another $30 and bond for the remainder. So 3 years down the road, we're back to a sensible plan in town where we are paying as we go for what is maintenance.
Mr. Fischetti, I'm just going to have another round on this issue. In the debate that just ended, which I know both of you watched, your Republican colleagues seemed to suggest that bonding was the way to go. You've just, if I understood you correctly, I'm going to give you a chance to clear up my confusion. You just suggested that there needs to be some analysis preceding the bonding. Is that correct? And could you explain how that works with what your colleagues just suggested?
Yes. I'm not suggesting we do a split tax versus a bond. I am saying a bond. And what my colleagues spoke about of fencing it in. What I would like to do is work with the town comptroller to find out exactly where is the sweet spot in interest rates. Is it a short period, a long period? My feeling and my understanding is that we need a certain amount of money per year to rebuild our roads and to resurface them. We don't know if that issue is going to be, that amount is going to be stable for the next 13 or 14 years. There are a variety of reasons where that price can change. It could be the fluctuation of interest rates, the fluctuation of cost of employment, or more importantly, the fluctuation of liquid asphalt, which is used to make and cover the roads. So, JD, I wasn't talking about doing a hybrid of both. I was specifically talking about a bond, working with our comptroller and the town board to make sure that the bond that we do issue is the correct length of time for the correct amount of money to do the roads the way they're supposed to.
The plan we've got takes us out 15 to 18 years ahead, spends a relatively constant amount of money in today's dollars, year after year. And because we did a lot of work with cold in place this year, that should get us round most of the inflation in asphalt prices. That was the whole point of the cold in place experiment.
Mr. Parsons, we're going to go to in the time remaining, we're going to go to the issue of affordable housing. The prior county executive, as you're aware, signed a settlement agreement with Westchester County that would require some 750 affordable housing units to be built in town. In the debate that just ended...
In town or in the county?
750 affordable housing units be built in Westchester County. Yeah, if it's 750 affordable housing units here, I don't think that's going to cut it. But there is a substantial number that I think 120 that would have to be built in Lewisboro. Could we just have your views on one issue that arose during the prior debate, which is, does the county even have jurisdiction to come in and tell us to build those housing units?
No. But they have means of persuasion, just like the federal government does. I mean, if they were to decide that they were going to close Ward Pound Ridge as retaliation, they could. They could do all kinds of things.
Do you think the Obama administration would do that?
I didn't say the Obama, I said the county. You were talking about, could the county
this
force us?
is a federal housing settlement, so...
Yeah, but I
it does
thought you
have
were
some-
saying that could the county come in and force us?
Well, I mean, I'd just like to hear you talk more about what this possible retaliation would be.
Oh, we are part of the county of Westchester when I last looked. If county government really wants to get nasty with us, it can. Not specifically to force us, maybe to build X number of houses, but it's just like the seatbelt law in New Hampshire, right? In the end, New Hampshire had to cave. In the end, superior government has got means of pressuring local governments, but that's all apart from the real subject. The town board, and as a group, without any dissent, agreed my response to the Federal Monitor. It's on the website, and it's pretty damn clear. It says that any large-scale development in this town is essentially dead. First of all, because of the New York City watershed. Secondly, because of Stanford and Norwalk watersheds into their reservoirs. Secondly, that the function, oh, okay, but I mean, this is a big issue.
Mr. Fischetti, your response.
Earlier we heard from Mr. Sclaren that the Republican Party is dealing with fear. What I hear here is a man speaking about fear of retaliation from the federal government, fear of retaliation of the county closing down wonderful Ward Pound Ridge Reservation that meets the needs of all of Westchester County, not just Lewisboro residents. The settlement itself does give the county the ability to proceed with legal actions against us if we do not follow the model ordinance. I believe that one of the things we should do is stand alongside our other towns, our county executive, work together as a team to deal with the affordable housing unit. Having said that, as a young man, as a young woman, my mom and her grandmother lived in affordable housing in New York City on the Lower East Side in a rent-stabilized apartment. I understand it, and I have, I understand that, and I see it. In the South Salem Fire Department, we have a number of members that live outside of town that dedicate their time to our town. They're here on Monday nights for drills. When there are fires, they show up. They're here Saturday mornings for drills at the recent open house. Most of those are the guys that are here. So affordable housing is something that we could use in our town to meet the needs of our town, the needs of our senior citizens who want to stay here, who this town was built on their backs, and I think we owe it to them to have a place for them to live.
Mr. Parsons, your response.
That's exactly why I wrote that response, which, if you go through it, explains why large-scale development will never work here, and why we should attack it via repurposing existing housing and via accessory apartments, and why a portion of those should be reserved for emergency workers, or,
First responders.
emergency responders. Well, I brought the federal monitor up here for most of a day and showed him round, because he doesn't understand Lewisboro one iota. And I have never managed to get on with somebody without meeting them face to face. So I thought it was important to meet with him. There's one specific suggestion in his report he laughed at when he saw what he'd proposed or what he'd come up with, which was housing inside a swamp, a lake, and a cliff. And we decided that cliff dwelling was not appropriate. We then went round.
Did that have 3 bathrooms? I'm just curious.
We went round every. I showed him all the preserves essentially in town and the lakes to point out the kind of environment he was talking about. I showed him how the most obvious area in this town to build affordable housing is all owned by New York City with the specific purpose of preventing any development.
Your response, Mr. Fischetti.
I applaud Mr. Parsons for taking the monitor out and showing them around town. Folks, the good news is this. We both want to work to preserve the town of Lewisboro. We have a little bit different way of looking at doing it. The answer is there is not going to be large-scale buildings in our town. The answer is the county is not going to close down the Watertown Reservation. Let's not deal with fear. Let's deal with fact. The fact of the matter is the zoning laws were built in this town to protect our town from overbuilding. So we have our 4 acres, 2 acres, wherever it may be. While I was out campaigning, I ran into a young family that put an extension on their home. They have a divorcee living in there with 1 child. It's a wonderful operation. I wish the monitor would have seen something like that and meet that man, tell him how he spent the money that he saved up and how this is helping our town. I applaud him for taking the monitor out, but I think that monitor should have met people in our town, individuals in our town who are living in those kind of apartments that the monitor decides he doesn't want to overlook. It would have been nice for the monitor to meet the leaders of our fire department and ambulance corps so he can get a first-hand view of what is going on with that. But I do applaud Mr. Parsons for bringing the monitor out of town. I appreciate that.
We have about 3 minutes left, and I'm going to give the last question to Jane.
One of your big interests through life up here and a campaign promise that you made when you first ran was to do a lot of work in our town parks and preserves. And I think people would appreciate hearing exactly what you have accomplished, because I know that you and groups of volunteers have been putting a lot of effort into cleanup and refurbishment of these beautiful parks. So maybe you could just give a quick overview of what you've been up to?
I will. First, it's far from finished. So I'm not claiming success or total victory. I'm saying we've made some big steps forward. First of all, let's take Oldfield Preserve. Oldfield Preserve is supposed to be fields, most of it. And we have done an enormous amount of work to restore it to fields, because that's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be bramble bushes. We got rid of those on most of it, and it now is looking like a first-class preserve. We installed a bridge there in order to make the trail, and cleared the trail system, to make the trail complete with a bridge. We went to Honor True, and the Honor True Reserve, we had to put in another bridge there. We have cleaned it up, and it's now in pretty good shape, and it was devastated by Sandy. Leon Levy, Leon Levy, a massive amount of work has been done on trail clearing, on all the litter, and by litter, I don't mean necessarily bottles. I mean cars, a boat, refrigerators. All of that stuff has been got out of the main area of what people think of as the Leon Levy. There is other land which still needs clearing, but the main is done. And finally, we've put in a parking area, or we haven't, but we're in the process right now, and if somebody looks, they'll see the trees are down and the clearing has begun.
Mr. Fischetti, you get the last word.
I applaud the work that's being done in this town, but the fact of the matter is, there is so much more we can do. The towns are accessible, the parks are accessible for some, but not all. I would like to see the parks opened up for more families in our town and for children. I applaud him for putting in the parking lot, the Leon Levy Preserve. There are other preserves in town that could use additional parking as well. But I would like to see the town parks opened up in a way that more families can use that. Specifically, one area is there are no bike trails anywhere in town other than Route 35. There may be some small ones, but certainly not a place where a young family with children who just learning to ride bikes can go on a safe, long ride other than the small parking lots around town. I would like to see something that would work, have some folks come in and look at a way that the Horsemen's Association, the hikers and the bikers can all somehow use the park in a way that it's beneficial for everyone in town, because everyone in town's taxes are paying for those.
Gentlemen, we've come to the end of our debate. We'd like to thank you very much, as well as Lewisboro Community Television and the Lewisboro Library, and ladies and gentlemen in our audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all coming.
You're watching Lewisboro Community Television, Channel 20.